A Mobster's Midrash by Michael Diamond. Chapter 6. Nullified. The Holy One, blessed be its name, dropped a dime on my subconscious the morning of the eve of the great disavowal. That's when we of the gang formerly known as the Tribe gather in all solemnity to pronounce before witnesses and the scrolls of Holy Writ that, with regard to all promises and vows and oaths and all manner of self-impositions that we may swear to ourselves in the coming year, all of them are null and void, nixed, blotted out. Weirdly convenient, I guess. We edit everything we say before we even begin to say it. With the acceleration of artificial intelligence, pretty much all human product will end up in Darwin's waste bin, nullified in advance. But that's another story. The concept of nullifying oaths in advance goes back to the schoolhouse mob, the mob down in Zion, South Jersey, forerunners of the Fixer's outfit. Weezer, a.k.a. God Help Him, son of Jake, actually the second Goomba to bear that moniker, was one of the survivors of the Italian mob's hit on the last schoolhouse stronghold, ironically dubbed Dovecoat, though some call it Knives Out for obvious reasons. A real bloodbath. Put the kibosh on the Starchild revolt against the Italian Godfathers. Starchild was the chief enforcer and muscle for the schoolhouse gang. High hopes for that soldier. Bad times for the schoolies and the fixers after them. Anyway, Weezer number 2 comes up with this great idea about nullifying vows in advance, hoping to avoid a lot of future bloodshed most likely. Better to be nullified in intent than in body. It caught on. So like I was saying, on the morning of the eve of said nullification, I was walking along the canal with my buddy Shorty, a consigliere in the energy and transportation biz, when I had this epiphany, a real parting of the clouds. Not to bore you with excessive detail, I recalled my mother of blessed memory, she who carries the sun on her back, who was completely checked out around the time I was coming of age in the Schuylkill Valley on account of her divorce. My younger sisters and I were basically on our own. Plus minus. Good teenage son that I was, I deployed the most sensible strategy in response to her maternal ineptitude. I gave her a large ration of shit. Not proud of that, but there you have it. It was bad enough that she put me on the horn with her mother, she who weaves the cosmos into being. My grandmother informed me that my mother should have sent me packing along with her recently divorced husband, my father, he who shines light amongst the living. That sure beat all. I'm recounting my tale of adolescent woe to my pal Shorty, by way of explanation for my ill-spent youth, when suddenly it hits me. As soon as Shine's light trucks off to North Jersey, Carries the Sun must have been sucked into a black hole of memory back to when she was a mere mooncalf in the clutches of her evil grandfather, Crocodile Tears. Shit. Exactly what happened a quarter century later when her second consort, the distant one, dropped dead on the can. Not to get too graphic, but facts are facts. That's when she let on to me about the wormhole in her memory that had just opened up on account of her terror at being alone in the world. I asked her why the hell had she given me old Crocodile Tears' wristwatch as a keepsake some years back. It's a good watch, she says. I guess none of us was exactly connecting all the dots. Until my little walk along the canal, I hadn't connected the dots all the way back to the original parting of the ways between Shine's light and Carries the Sun and the specific deleterious effect it must have had on my maternal progenitor's aptitude for mothering at the time. Sheesh. The wormhole, so obvious. Funny thing is, it made me feel both better and worse. Better in that how the hell could I, a teenage reprobate, have had any idea about her wormhole to hell? Worse on account of the fact that her suffering so much outstripped the measly degree of empathy I could muster at the time. That's where the great disavowal comes in, and the dime the Holy One dropped on me. This epiphany about my mother came to me in a most timely fashion, right before an entire day of fasting and supplication. In my daily work, I've got a ringside seat to the grand theater of rewards and punishments meted out in this world, so I'm not so keen on the simple-minded take on the subject that's peddled in most houses of worship. Just doesn't work for me. I mean, who are we to say, for example, that an ancient temple was destroyed and its people slaughtered and sent into exile because the folks that worshiped there just didn't make the grade? Who says that kind of crap anymore? Not I, for one. However, I go for the camaraderie, bits of poetry, and every once in a while a truly transcendent experience. So I waltz into the sanctuary carrying this hot tip from the cosmos, and I stumble across a wishful little line, quote, "May our willful transgressions be transformed into errors of ignorance," unquote, or some such. That was exactly what had just happened to me. Before my very brain, the willful transgressions of my teenage self were miraculously transformed into obvious errors committed in the absence of sufficient information. Everybody's behavior, including my own, suddenly made sense. Classic, had I only known. I felt myself being formed by the hands of the potter. Call it a kind of assisted living, getting in touch with my inner geezer. Puts a floor under the self, slightly dulled the sharp pangs of regret, only to reveal the underlying metallic tang of grief, irretrievable grief. Comes out in the lungs after a prolonged and blissful fast, at least for me. What to do, what to do. A friend of mine who runs a gypsy tea room, Madame Rosamunda, just dropped a great one on me the other day when we were chewing the fat with our fellow members of the Intergalactic Shamus Fellowship. Yeah, we come in all flavors. So she says in passing, all I have is beginnings, thousands of beginnings. Can you imagine? I could. A sea of birthings going on every which way, a festival of fecundity, the workshop of creation, the palace of brightness, every cosmic luminary on display. Wow! Much better than 1,000 endings, the graveyard of the imagination. Lit a fire under me. That's when I heard it, the music of the flaming voice, all castanets and clapping and stamping and snorting and full-throated hollering. Seraphim in high heels and lace dresses, and us rising up beside them, calling each to each, "Ole!" Takes your breath away, melted in the fiery furnace of beings that dance around the throne of the Holy One, whoever she may be. Just in time for the full moon hoedown, dancing under the stars in flimsy little tenement booths, constructions purely of the moment, shaking it to the 6 directions, with the elegant, the fragrant, the pungent, the hidden. Every dance a Hoshana, deliverance in the turn of an ankle, the light fantastic toe, breathless. The Boardwalk Empire sprang fully formed out of the fever dreams of rich Philadelphians. 1854, the Camden Atlantic Railroad cranked up the conveyor belt to port its chumps from the city of brotherly love and dumped them on the white sands of Atlantic City beaches. Upwards of 500,000 a year chased the promise of a cure, the cure for an excess of cash in their pocketbooks. They filled the beds of a couple dozen truly swank hotels up and down the boardwalk, including Philly contractor Johnny the Mick's skyscraper by the sea. The first Miss America pageant was held right there in Atlantic City in 1921, but it was Prohibition that really gave the Atlantic City carriage trade a shot in the arm. That's when Enoch muscled in. Called him Nookie back then, his salad days. He was some kind of chimera, Republican Party kingmaker, newspaperman, banker, just plain boss to most, the czar of the Ritz. Generous to a fault. He could afford it, running around town in a powder blue rolls wearing a raccoon coat. What a sybarite, a far cry from the sober soul he is today. Whilst everywhere else in the country was drying up, Nookie's joints were wet as wet can be. Never got his hands dirty, though. Took a cut from every hooch purveyor, dice parlor, and cat house in his jurisdiction. Every player a winner, from the naive tourist to the most cynical local Paul. Atlantic City, unofficial convention capital of the whole damn country, had need of a colossal jamboree and dance hall venue, the house that Nookie built. It took 3 years to complete the construction of the Atlantic City Convention Hall in 1929. By that time, Nookie had made the personal acquaintance of every major bootlegger in America. It was no accident he hosted the newly congealed syndicate, the Big Seven, and I don't mean accounting firms. Mr. Congeniality himself, considering it was murder brought them all together. These Goombas had decided they needed to come up with a better means of doing business than bumping each other off for fun and profit. Meyer Lansky figures he, Johnny, Lucky, and Frankie, just a bunch of high-spirited boys, would host the party whilst he honeymooned with his new bride in a swell joint on the beach. Makes sense. Nookie guaranteed no cops. Would have spoiled the honeymoon. Looking back, it's crystal clear this is where it all began. Enoch pulling the strings behind the syndicate. Nobody the wiser as to just how much power the dude wielded. He's more subtle these days, but we'll come back to that. Those 4 days in May 1929 saw the biggest parade of wise guys ever in broad daylight. You had your Big Apple, a.k.a. Babylon, and Garden State delegation. Johnny the Fox Torrio, Lucky Luciano, and Frank Costello, the organizers, along with Meyer the Brain Lansky. Giuseppe Joe Adonis Dotto, Vito Genovese, Manhattan's finest from the Mazzaria outfit, Albert the Mad Hatter Anastasia, Frank Cheech Scalise, and Vinnie Mangano, also of Manhattan, but part of the Tequila Mineo bunch. Gaetano Tommy Brown Lucchese from the Bronx Reina clan, Borino Willie Moore Moretti, a Masseria Goomba out of Newark, Meyer the Brain Lansky, who would go on to become a major innovator in international money laundering and offshore banking, and Benny Bugsy Siegel, the two Yids, who provided protection for liquor shipments syndicate-wide and eventually morphed into Murder, Inc., enforcers at large. The Guerrilla Boys, Louis Lepke Buchalter and Jacob Gora Shapiro, the Rockefellers of the underworld, Abner Longies Willman, another wise guy from Newark, Dutch Schultz, beer baron of the Bronx and numbers king of Harlem, Owen Oni the Killer Madden, boss man of Hell's Kitchen and the Irish Combine, boxing promoter and proud manager of the Cotton Club, formerly of the Gopher Gang, and Frankie Erickson, bookmaker to the Big Apple. The Windy City fielded the Capone team. Alphonse Scarface Capone, Frank the Enforcer Nitty, Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik, Frank Klein Rio, plus Capone's bodyguard, the Irishman Frank Mackerlane from the South Side. The City of Brotherly Love contributed another big Yid contingent, Irving Waxy Gordon Wexler, pickpocket turned rum runner, Harry Nig Rosen Stromberg, trafficker in narcs and numbers, Max Boo Boo Hoff, boxer and bootlegger who ended up broke and running an ice cream parlor near the U of P, and Irving Bitsy Bits and Charlie Schwartz. The Sixth City, later dubbed the Mistake on the Lake, sailed to Atlantic City as the Little Jewish Navy, manned by Morris Mo Dalitz, the future Mr. Las Vegas, Louis Lou Roddy Rothkopf, and Leo Charles Polizzi Berkowitz, a Jew in Italian clothing representing the Scalish mob. The ultra-violent Purple Gang rolled in from Motor City featuring Abe Bernstein and his brother Joey Bugs Bill Bernstein, rum runners, hijackers, and cold-blooded killers, pioneers in the criminal use of submachine guns. Beantown coughed up its favorite bootlegger, narco-trafficker, and gambling majordomo, Charlie King Solomon, tight with the Bronfman outfit in Canada. Cowtown wrangled John Lazio on double duty for the Balustrier Gang and the Pendergast machine, political connections all the way up to the President of the U.S. of A. The Big Easy and the Sunshine State cakewalked into town with a couple of Lucky and Frankie's associates, Sylvester Silver Dollar Sam Carolla, formerly of the Black Hand, and gambling partners with Kingfish Huey Long, and Santo Trafficante, Sr., king of the Bolita lotteries. Not exactly a collection of model citizens, but that's the long and short of it. Enoch set it up, the whole game board. Atlantic City is the future playground of syndicate heavies, especially members of the board, a nodal point pinged at one time or another by nearly every major player of the underworld. The Irish were conspicuously underrepresented in the Big AC Jamboree, most likely as they had already begun their exfiltration into the upper world of politics and law enforcement, most useful. Lucky made the mistake of getting into a pissing contest with another newspaperman, a particularly wealthy one, William Randolph Hearst, over a dame. Nookie drew a bad card. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go directly to jail. By all accounts, he faded into relative obscurity after getting out of the slammer. Nookie was no more. Or so it seemed. By my calculations, it was about that time that he metamorphosed into Enoch Notch Metatron, a.k.a. Naki, the Ancient of Days, the shadowy figure who pulls the strings of the syndicate puppets from behind a wall of curtains so thick that you could have employed an entire army of haberdashers to make suits out of it and never finish for 10,000 years. A rough estimate. Bottom line, he didn't die. But he didn't exactly live either. The Interworld is a hazy kind of place, no clear boundary between the living and the dead. That became Enoch's turf. No more sybaritic nookie for Naki. Wasn't in the cards. Maybe accounts for his rather severe style. Whoever it was that died December 9th, 1968 at the Atlantic County Convalescent Home wasn't him. Simple as that. How they did it, I don't know. I think Fatface, my pal Sandy, had a hand in it, would be my guess. But that's above my pay grade. Other side of the firewall in our deal. Imagine the technology. Come to think of it, probably Sis and Ossie were involved too. They've got that whole not-so-secret reanimation biz they do whenever the going gets tough. I saw it myself. Palace of the Bone of Heaven. Wow, still blows me away. Naki always did favor them over Seth the Jackal. Kinda makes you wonder. Probably they cut him in on the secret. I'll bet dollars to donuts. An acceptable wager, though I'm no flatfoot. As fell Nookie, so fell Atlantic City. Automobiles and airplanes released AC's captive audience from the confines of the rail lines to find other venues for frolic and vice. Los Angeles, California, and Las Vegas, Nevada, both buffed up to a golden shine, especially after the likes of Mickey Cohen and Bugsy Siegel did the advanced waxing. Whole new ball game, a real slugfest for control of those two arenas. Back in South Jersey, the former world's playground took a long, dusty slide into obsolescence and decay. The town was on life support by the late 60s. The Philly mob still had a loose grip on the Boardwalk Empire, such as it was, but business was not exactly booming. You could roll a bowling ball down the boardwalk and have a clear shot from one end to the other. Never tried it. Bums, scam artists, hookers, and their pimps filled in where the tourists left off. Real estate prices plummeted. Anything other than beachfront could be had for a song, but no one was singing. Yet. Vacant was not an attractive look for the oceanic playground. It was only a matter of time before some wise guy parachuted in and swept all the cards from the tables. The year of the nation's bicentennial celebration, 1976, when Mayor Frank Rizzo put the lid on the party in Philly for fear of an invasion of undesirables, the esteemed voters of the Garden State, in a Jersey-wide referendum, decided that it was time to legalize gambling in Atlantic City, and only in Atlantic City. Invite the undesirables there, for God's sake. Governor Brendan Byrne put his John Hancock on the legislation, and he proclaims, for the sake of whoever cares to listen, "Organized crime is not welcome in Atlantic City. I warn them, keep your filthy hands off Atlantic City. Keep the hell out of our state." Two local boombas, Nicky Scarfo and his nephew, Crazy Phil Leonetti, look at each other and shrug. Doesn't he know we're already here? Apparently, the governor was hoping for Walt Disney. Game on, and the mob is already 10 moves ahead. The New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement and the Casino Control Commission fumbles and pratfalls like your basic Keystone cops. Nobody's minding the store. There's a shortfall in the personnel department, and the manpower they do have is largely untrained. They don't even have frickin' light bulbs overhead in the Trenton office and have to knock off at 4:15 in the afternoon because it's too dark to get any work done. The ink is hardly dry on some of the policies they plan to put in place. And there are half a dozen or so agencies competing for turf and snooping on each other. To be fair, they have reason to do so. A goodly number of enforcement officers are seeking jobs with higher pay in the gaming industry. An avalanche of toxic landfill begins to rumble in the general direction of Atlantic City from both north and south. Up in Babylon, you had your Russian mafia types, happy satyrs all, who preferred to fund unscrupulous American businessmen who were more than tickled to gobble up their inflated handouts for apartment buildings in Manhattan and new casinos in Atlantic City. Useful idiots. The Big Apple Sicilian Goombas already had their fingers in the pie. The Gambinos had smeared their influence all over the Jersey suburbs and were closing fast. A fistful of AC restaurants and bars were financed via the Gambino Dollar Laundromat. Fake names and laundered cash paved the way to a boardwalk hotel. The Genovese family wrapped their mitts around casino schools, airport control, and a jewelry store. A particularly violent North Jersey mob muscled in on the janitorial biz and was seen nosing around limos and laundries. The Lucchese crew owns a handful of legitimate ventures. The 30,000 hotel and service workers are practically begging to be organized by corrupt unions. Then there's Philly. Enter Angelo Bruno, a.k.a. the Gentle Don, Pharaoh of Philadelphia, capo di tutti capi, the only remaining original syndicate member from the 1960s. A native Siciliano, Angelo comes to head the Philly mob in 1959 on account of his intimate relationship with Carlo Gambino, one of the 5 major Goombas of Babylon. Angelo's hallmark is soft power, bribery, and outmaneuvering his opposition, rather than the use of bloodshed. He also puts the kibosh on the narcotics trade for his own crew, though he takes a cut from all the out-of-town interlopers in the poppy elixir biz. He prefers the seemlier transactions of bookmaking, loan sharking, and prostitution. A fella's got to have standards. Lickety-split, he nails down the financing of a house of cards through a Teamster pension fund with the help of a Vegas associate. The Gentle Don persuades more than 40 vending machine accounts to sign on with his exclusive cigarette distribution firm. Where there's smokes, there could be a convenient fire. Summer people come and summer people go. Most flood the beaches and boardwalk of Atlantic City in their flimsy attire, a healthy patch of lobsterized skin exposed for further solar cooking. The beach crowd, those who dwell in summer's home, make a feint at style, the latest swimwear, sunglasses. There is another cohort that seeps into the shadow of the Boardwalk Empire and its proliferation of seedy outbuildings. They, too, are summer people, arisen to feed on the detritus cast off by the tonier visitors to the casinos by night and the silken sands by day. A different class of customers, you might say, culled from the underbellies of Philly and Babylon, released from their bastilles in a mad rush to fleece the moneyed rubes. Hookers and their pimps, con men of every stripe, small-time crooks and backstreet gamblers, all there for a cut of the action. It's the Wild West of seaside hustle. Then there's the backwash, the Pine Barrens crowd, summer people all year round, who never make it to the beachside resort either for lack of interest or funds or both. There are the old-time Pineys whose families remember the crash of the heroic Mexican pilot near the headwaters of the Tulpehocken Creek in 1928, the day before Bastille Day, never to be liberated from his anonymity, never to match his American doppelganger, Lucky Lindy. The annual woodland tribute by the American Legion Band smothered by distance and disinterest. The people of Chatsworth also bear the memory of the Great Chatsworth Fire of 1954 and of the Italian prince and diplomat whose villa once graced the shores of Lake Shamong. In fact, it was the industrious prince that gave Chatsworth its name by building a Tudor manor in the likeness of the country seat of the Duke of Devonshire. The humble colliers and sawyers of Shamong yielded their name to the fantasy incarnated by the Italian prince. When the prince was transferred to another diplomatic post, Chatsworth's elegant estate was resorbed piecemeal back into the womb of the Pine Barrens, only a handful of bricks to suggest its former existence. The Pine Barrens giveth, and the Pine Barrens taketh. Blueberries remain, as does the hiddenness of the Pine Barrens. The sometimes baseball-sized fruits attract the down-and-out crowd from the back streets of Philly, bussed in by some Dickensian fiend to harvest nature's baubles, some whilst in advanced states of inebriation. Inebriety, a theme of many of the Pine Barrens' temporary visitors, all the way back to the bootleggers and moonshiners of the 20s and 30s, and up to the present-day hijinks of bored and restless youth. The humble Pineys send their children off to college and spread stories of the Jersey Devil to fend off the overly curious about their hidden kingdom. It was rumored that Jimmy Hoffa, Teamster president and mobster camp follower, was buried there, all evidence to the contrary. Few souls actually span the divide between Piney and seaside denizen. That's where I picked up the lead on the mouth, as he was generally known in Jersey, the one who cannot keep it shut, a.k.a. our old pal Opener, among the few who crossed the surf and turf divide. Remember him? Found out he was the bastard son of a mob boss, kicked out of the seaside villa at a young age, only to make his way as a prince among the derelict, raising hell in the back alleys of AC and on the sandy trails of the Pine Barrens after a stint with the judges during their brief reign. A wastrel, a miscreant, a blatant opportunist, but a damn good blues harp player, I must admit. He knew how to organize a gang of thugs and leveraged his 15 minutes of fame with the judges to garner a following of wannabe mobsters, mostly carjacking and drug running with a sprinkling of retail extortion. Eros and Thanatos walk hand in hand down AC's seaside strand, the bikini and the stiletto, a drop-dead pair, two of a kind. Angelo Bruno wants to preserve his hold on his decaying seaside hustle and at the same time avoid all-out war. When war comes to the Boardwalk Empire, the pharaohs of Philly give Opener a key to the city. But that is not the way of the docile Don who precedes them. The fishman, shamus extraordinaire, is also a proud citizen of the world's playground, Atlantic City, New Jersey, an autochthon risen from the same sandy turf as the boardwalk itself. That's why the gentle Don fingers him to go to Nineveh, New York, to sort things out, maybe convince the Lucchese mob to repent of their turf poaching ways. Word on the street says it's the Russian mall behind the whole make nice idea. Go figure. No doubt she has Enoch pulling a few carefully tied strings. Nineveh is a sleepy hamlet on the Susquehanna River, about 3 hours north and west of the Big Apple. A handful of modest homes. It lies along the tracks of the Delaware and Hudson Railway. The town's only mark of distinction is the railway trestle that can be seen by land and from the water. That's it. A perfect place for a mobster hideout, exactly what it was for the Whale, the rather portly boss of the Lucchese mob who also ran the biggest floating crap game in Manhattan, headquartered at the Stage Deli, home of the corned beef Confucius. The Whale and a handful of his fellow Goombas will take the fall for the French Connection heroin scheme, and that would be that. It was a big deal, the biggest, most of the heroin supply for the continental U.S. The labs in Marseille are run by the Corsican mob under the protection of our very own CIA spooks in exchange for keeping the commies out of the old port of Marseille. A bunch of dirty NYPD cops make the seized evidence available to the Lucchese Goombas for a cut of the action, replacing the heroin with flour and cornstarch. The switcheroo only comes to light when some other officers of the law notice that insects are eating all the evidence. 70 million smackers worth of smack vanishes. Anyway, before the dominoes fall and the French Connection takedown, this fat cat is cooling his heels in Nineveh of all the gin joints. When Angelo Bruno sends the fishman, a shamus in the entertainment biz like myself, to politely ask him to lay off Atlantic City for the sake of peaceful syndicate relations. You can imagine the fishman is quaking his boots over that one. He knows who's who. Besides, he's really a rather mild fellow. Mother called him her little dove. Surprise of surprises, the Whale goes all sackcloth and ashes and agrees to stick with legit business deals for the time being. Maybe he could read the tea leaves, knew the bad news coming down the pike. Maybe he had other fish to fry. Maybe it's really the reason the Lucchese mob sticks to legit businesses in AC. Whatever the case may be, the fishman hightails it back to Don Angelo and thanks his lucky stars his hide is intact. I see him from time to time at Intergalactic Shamus Fellowship hoedowns. There's a whole army of us gathering in AC, ops research for the new hotel and casino enterprises. So, end of story. Not exactly happy ever after, but sometimes it pays to give the competition the chance to change their minds. There are other plans for the mouth. The pharaoh of late 70s Philly figures he needs a junkyard dog right there in AC, someone who isn't what you'd call above the fray, but actually relishes it, in case the war heats up. He sends him to apprentice with little Nicky Scarfo, a Goomba so violent and intemperate that the gentle Don has long since banished him to Atlantic City. The mouse could bring it. As fate would have it, Angelo Bruno is not invited to the war for Atlantic City. He's nullified, rubbed out, whacked by his own Goombas right in front of his house in South Philly on March 21st, 1980, the last year of Frank Rizzo's mayoral reign. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I'm working a job with the Ukrainian, guys up to his elbows in test tubes and pipettes, a little scientific exploration in Philly, if you could believe it, but that's a tale for another time. He's never been to Strolli's, incredible. He's a chef on the side at the Black Banana, so how could he not know about the best little hole-in-the-wall mom-and-pop Italian bistro in the city? Of course, I had to introduce him to the cuisine. So we hoof it to this truly dicey neighborhood, Dickinson and South Mole, down at the heels and not a cobbler in sight. We turn the corner onto Dickinson, and suddenly you see the block entirely parked up with caddies and Eldorados and Lincolns, brand spanking new, a kind of South Philly Shangri-La. Up a couple brick steps and walk right into Mom and Pop Stroley's dining room, complete with plastic mandolins on the walls, red and white checkered tablecloths, and the menus printed on paper placemats. Prices hadn't gone up since the Great Depression. On a typical night, Mom and Pop S walk the floors in jeans and flannel shirts, making sure everybody's comfortable and enjoying themselves. However, this night is not like all other nights. The Ukrainian and I are in a state of high delectation. Most likely a spattering of red sauce adorns the napkins tucked beneath our chins. When suddenly, Mom and Pop Stroley dash into the room dressed to the nines and scoot out the door into a waiting limo. Weird. They were definitely not all smiles like they were going to the opera. Next morning, the Philadelphia Inquirer splashes the story of Angelo Bruno's demise across the front page. So I put two and two together and figure La Familia Stroley must have been on the payroll of Don Angelo, maybe even laundering a few Benjamins for him. They caught the two Goombas who did the dirty deed, but released them on bail. Can you believe it? I could, until I talked to the hippie carpenter in the flophouse next door to mine. A genuine Frank Zappa lookalike. Turns out he's the local Republican committeeman. When I express surprise at his political leanings, he says, "You don't get it. The Democrats are the machine around here, right? How do you think the two high-profile murder suspects could be released on bail?" The scales fell from my eyes with a loud clunk. Over the next 2 years, the city of brotherly love witnesses a bloody struggle for the reins of the Philly mob. The Gentle Don's assassin is found iced in the trunk of a car with dozens of gunshot wounds and $300 in bills poking out of both ends of his gastrointestinal tract. Some kind of signifier of the board's displeasure, I would imagine. Immediately upon Angelo Bruno's demise, Philip Chicken Man Testa takes the helm of the organization and brings back little Nicky from AC to be his consigliere. Almost exactly a year after that, the Chicken Man is blown to smithereens by a well-placed nail bomb beneath his front porch, as memorialized in the Springsteen tune Atlantic City. The kaboom that was heard around South Philly. That little catastrophe was engineered by Testa's two flunkies, Petey Casella and Frank Chicky Narducci, Sr. Guess they were looking for advancement in the trade. An aside, Narducci went to high school with my mother, she who carries the sun on her back. She told me she had an arrangement with this future mobster who she mentioned by name. He'd walk her to school and give her protection in exchange for some help with math. Nothing untoward as far as I could tell. She lived into her mid-70s. He did not. The Chicken Man's untimely death triggers a bloodbath, the likes of which the city has not seen since the British mob muscled in on Philly during the battles of 1777. Perhaps a slight exaggeration. The uptick in mayhem is largely on account of the fact that the Philly mob falls into the hands of that homicidal carbuncle, Little Nicky. Shortly after New Year's Day, 1982, Chicky Narducci meets his maker at age 49 at the wrong end of a pair of hot revolvers, the ninth member of the Bruno mob to meet a similar fate. In the sordid cycle of revenge, the gunman was Salvatore Testa, the Chicken Man's son, crown prince of the Philly mob under Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo. 2 years later, Little Nicky eliminates the up-and-coming young mobster, in spite of the youngster's close business relationship with Donald Trump's casino operations, thus getting ahead of any internal competition. The capo of the city of brotherly love and the Boardwalk Empire solidifies his reputation for eating his young and whoever else is foolish enough to look at him cross-eyed. The mouth casts about for a new gig in AC, not necessarily musical. He's long since hung up his harp and exchanged it for a 357. Little Nicky asks him to elbow his way into the back rooms papered with casino blueprints to ensure that the interests of Scarf Inc. are appropriately represented. The concrete business is booming with the construction of a handful of gambling palaces, including Harrah's Trump Plaza. Scarf pours the concrete footings, not to be confused with cement overshoes. The mouth works Little Nicky's connections with Local 54 of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees and Bartenders International Union and greases the mayor's very dry palms. Yip, the mouth's real first name, as in Ippolito, also fronts the sale of P2P, the crucial ingredient in the synthesis of crystal meth, the drug of choice in the Philly, South Jersey market, and a perfect fit for the paranoid style of the Philly mob. Scarfo controls the trade for the whole region. Philly is a closed shop. The Boardwalk Empire is in the bag, until it's not. Little Nicky's 3 boys, all spawned in the shadow of the boardwalk, will suffer mightily on account of their father's bloodlust. His namesake spends 30 years in the slammer. His eldest ditches the Scarfo name to fool the angel of death, and the baby ends up in a coma after a failed attempt at hanging himself. As for the Bruno Scarfo organization's stake in Atlantic City, no matter the years of deterioration and degradation to which the city by the sea is subjected, its pile of decay continues to attract the minions of Beelzebub. An endless parade of criminal empires, including but not limited to the Lucchese boys, who are no longer holed up in Nineveh, the Gambinos of Babylon, the Genovese mob, the Colombo Goombas, and eventually the Black Mafia, the Russian Mafia, the Chinese Triads, and the South American cartels. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Southern Kingdom still stands, albeit in the shadow of the pharaohs of Philadelphia. But who knows how long?